Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome to San Bernardino Zoo, where today we have a challenge. In our Australian area, we're going to be recreating the saltwater crocodile habitat at Singapore Zoo, and that means guests, paths, water, barriers, and animals in very close proximity to each other. Let's get started. We've got this blocked out here. This is how much land and water the crocs are going to need, and we need to turn this into a beautiful saltwater crocodile habitat with underwater viewing. And the most particular part of it is that the underwater viewing enables the guests to see both the crocs underwater and out of the water on the land as well, which means that the water needs to be at the exact eye line of the guests so they can see above and beneath it at the same time. That's going to be quite a challenge. In Planet Zoo, in order to dive, the saltwater crocodiles need the water to be 3 meters deep. So I've got this 3-meter wall piece here, and we need the top of the water to be at the exact eye level of our little guest there. And then we need to dig down to get the water to the right depth. We also need to put the paths in so that we can start building the habitat itself. We're going to join those on to this curve of our Australian area here, just past the kangaroo and emu habitat. So we'll get entrances on both sides, and we want it to not join up to the other path that leads into the islands area. So we'll get that sorted and get it to join on nicely with the path that we've got there. Once we've got that joined on, we'll move on to one of the other aspects of this build, which is that I want guest seating in it as well. The seating that's linked to the animal talk points. I've only ever used that once before, and I've never used it in franchise mode, so this is going to be interesting. So we're going to pop some of these in here. I think I'm going to move everything a bit further away from the path shortly as well. And then we'll move on to getting the barriers in. So we're going to use the angle snap to get a nice curved barrier that goes across the front with a straight part in the middle to provide the main viewing. But we want a lot of viewing in here. I figure it's going to be a popular exhibit. So we want a lot of underwater viewing so we can get a lot of guests in as well. And in order to get the paths nicely aligned with the underwater viewing, we're going to use the snap alongside barriers option, and then we can just place paths down and the game's going to run it right next to that barrier for us. And then we can put some more in manually. We need the guests to be able to stand right at the barriers, and then we also need them to be able to get to the seating as well. The seating allows the guests to see over the water, obviously, and see the crocs on land at the back of the habitat. So we'll move the guest seating forward slightly and just start getting everything in the right place. And then we'll put the rest of the barriers in. We're just going to use plain glass for all the barriers here. Some of them will remain as glass, and some of them will be covered up with building items later. And then we can put the water in. Now when you place water in Planet Zoo, like so, it goes in 1 meter increments, and you can see here the water is actually higher than the blue wall piece, which is where we need it to be. So that is a problem. What that means is that we need to get our guests higher, which means taking our little dude, raising him up to where the water is going to be, then raising the ground up to meet him, and then redoing all the paths and the guest seating and everything else we've done. So we will race through that really quickly. There we go, that's it, done again. And now when we place the water back, it is at their eye level, and they're going to be able to see both over and underwater at the same time. Phew, that is the technical part of the build pretty much done. We've got everything working the way it should be. Now it's time to make it look nice. So this is going to be based heavily on the saltwater crocodile habitat at Singapore Zoo. I've taken a few liberties with the design, put a few of my own ideas in, and of course it's going to be slightly larger than the real one because we're in franchise mode, but it's going to be a pretty faithful recreation of the real habitat. And speaking of Singapore Zoo, I have a very exciting announcement to make. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be in Singapore, visiting every single one of Singapore's amazing zoos. I am so excited. I'm going to go and see the actual zoo that a lot of San Bernardino Zoo is based on. And I'm also going to be going to River Wonders, the Night Safari, which is what the Moonlight World was based on, and Bird Paradise as well. Cannot wait to do that. I'll make sure to get loads of videos to show you guys while I'm away. Back to this zoo. So one of the things I really liked about the original is that it's got this panoramic viewing all the way across the front here. So I've created a pretty intricate post, which is a little over the top in my opinion. So I'm going to use that to highlight a few bits of the build here and there, and then build one which more closely resembles the original Singapore Zoo. And I'm working on the facade of the viewing windows here. So I'm going to use these bark pieces, which I love, to make a nice, interesting wood-based kind of shelf that goes all the way along the glass. That is where you can put the informational signage and things like that. gives people somewhere to lean on as they look into the habitat. And I just really want to get this right. This is going to be enclosed. We're going to be putting a roof and walls on later on in the video. The key with Planet Zoo, or any building game I guess, is to build the interior first and then put the exterior on. Otherwise, trying to get the interior done when you've got a roof and walls in the way is a real pain. So that's starting to look nice. We're going to take these planks and copy them forward and move them down to get a seamless join between the top part and the part with the bark pieces on it. So let's get that in the right position. Kind of tricky, but we will get there. There we go. Now it's starting to look good, but I'm not really happy with the 4 planks together. You can see the joins where the planks come together, and we're going to have a lot of these, so I'm not happy with that. So what I'm going to do is put another plank on top of those planks that's long enough to just cover the whole area on its own, so we don't have any joins. I'm also going to put this piece from the Arctic pack in at the back, just to give us a little ridge where it joins onto the glass, which I think will look good. And speaking of the glass, it's time to do a little bit of work in that regard. So at the top here, we're going to take one of these fence pieces, get it to a more lighter metally kind of color, and then position this over the top of the glass so it doesn't just sort of end. It's got a more definite ending, which looks more realistic, and it's simply a matter of taking this and copying it all the way along, making the odd adjustment. This bit's easy because it's straight, the rest of it's curved, so we'll need to do a bit more work there. And then we'll put this wooden arbor piece in. It needs a bit of recoloring, but once we get it right, I much prefer this as the top to the viewing shelf. It looks so much better as one piece. Let's move on to the next stage of the build, which is the floor. So we're going to take this statue piece and use it to create flagstones, which are going to be the floor for the interior of this habitat. So we'll just get it as low as we can so that it still sits above the terrain everywhere. Custom floors are great, they can really make your build stand out, but before you do them, you need to make sure that the terrain is completely flat. Otherwise, it's going to end up sticking out above the floor. You're going to have to end up changing the height of the floor all over the place. It is a real nightmare, so just make sure you get it flat. This is nice and flat, so we'll put the first of the flagstones down there. Position one so there's just a tiny gap between them like you'd have in real life. And then we'll get 4 of these to start with, put one more in, and then the final one there. And then we're going to put a plaster panel that's darker coloured underneath it so that you don't see the sand sticking through and you get a nice realistic look to it. Now that we've got 4 of them, we can start copying those across this line of it and then put them into an even bigger group and copy them across the whole area. And there we go, there's the floor. I really like how that looks. Let's move on to the guest seating. I'm going to use the bark motif again here to cover up the sides of these steps and make them sit in nicely with the rest of the build. I've already recolored them to match all the wood that we've got in here. They're actually quite a nice subtle piece by Planet Zoo standards once you've recolored them. I think they sit in pretty nicely. We're going to put the railings in as well. Again, a bit of a crazy color, but we change this to a gray, get them in exactly the right position, and they sit in really nicely. One more across the back here, move the middle one in between them. I'm pretty happy with how this turns out in the end. There we go. Let's move on to the next part of the build. So we're going to take one of my favorite pieces, the waterfall piece, and use this as a building piece to provide a bit of interest to either side of the building. And it's also going to give us the sound of running water, which is going to be really useful for sort of selling the build. We'll get this into the right position here. I've slanted it because I think that looks cool, and we'll put another one there. And then we'll move on to the roof. So we've got this bamboo piece here, which is what I want to use, but as you can see, it doesn't look great. It's really square. It's very obvious that it's just a plane that's had a texture drawn onto it. So we need to replace it with something better, and I'm going to use these African panels. Why am I using 2 of these together? Let's explain it in a Franchise Masters. If you want to build something in a regular shape, like a rectangular roof, but you want to do it using non-grid pieces like these African sticks, if you include a grid piece in the build, then it enables you to do this. Once you've built one piece, you can select it while you're still in the group, and then you can copy it around, and it will copy itself on the grid, meaning you can pretty much instantly just spam loads of them around. They'll automatically be in exactly the right position, and then once you've done, you can just delete the grid pieces, and it will save you so much time compared to doing it all off the grid. Alright, I said I wasn't happy with the really intricate poles that I used to hold up the roof, so we're going to create some more simple ones here, which match pretty much exactly the ones in Singapore Zoo. It's just loads of the really thin climbing logs arranged into one piece. And then aside from the one on the left, which is hiding an animal talk point so that the guest seating works, we'll replace it all with these posts. We'll drop some of the cassowary pieces at the back of the seating here, just to tie it in with the rest of the Australian area. As you can see in the background, this habitat joins the Australian area to the islands area. So I want it to have a really Australian feel at the back and then a more tropical feel when you're inside it. We're going to put some fans in as well, probably necessary on an enclosed area in this kind of heat. So we'll just make some really simple fans. We'll put them into the floor and that'll enable us to space them correctly. So if we get one of them exactly in one of the flagstones that we made, there we go, then we can copy them one every 3 flagstones across the floor here. And once everything's in the right position, we can just select them all and then drag them up into the ceiling. That makes it nice and simple. There's the last one. Select them all, drag them up, get them into the right place, and we've got some nicely spaced fans there. Next up, I'm going to copy another things that I saw in Singapore Zoo, which are these yellow lines which go around the stairs. Fairly common in zoos, especially I think more so in America, where we are here, just to make absolutely certain that people don't trip over them and then sue the zoo or whatever. So some nice yellow lines, and then I'm going to add one final detail to the posts, which is to bury this African planter in, so it looks like a more solid kind of base for it where it joins on to the flagstones. The final thing we're going to do on the guest part of the build before we move into the habitat itself and get that ready for the crocodiles is a little finishing detail to the roof. So we're going to put some wooden pieces along the edge of it so it looks nice and solid from the outside, and then when you're actually inside the building, you've got these little bits of bamboo running all the way along the ceiling. That looks really nice and just replicates what I saw in all the reference photos of Singapore Zoo. Onto the habitat itself. So we're going to take this section of rock that we've been using throughout the zoo whenever we need something like this and use this to create a bank between the land and the water parts of the habitat. So we'll move that down, sink it in and play around with that a bit. Obviously we'll be deleting huge chunks of it till we get it to look the way that we want. And we're also going to have this underwater as well to make the bottom of the water part of it look a bit more interesting. We're going to drop logs and branches, some of the strangler fig roots that we use here. Got to be really careful about this because we need the water to be deep enough for the crocs to dive. So I'm just going to make it look as perfect as I can do, and then later on we'll probably end up deleting chunks of it until they can dive properly. We'll paint the bottom of the habitat and then start dropping some vegetation in both above and below the water. We want it to look really lush in here to start our transition into the tropical area. Then we're going to drop in one of the blueprints that we made back in Amazonia, the mud bath enrichment item. Great for crocodilians, and I purposely made it really generic looking so we can drop it into the zoo anywhere that we need it. So I'll put it in there, just change the colours of the rocks. It's all one group, so nice and easy to do. We'll just match the colours up with the rocks that we were already using in here. Put some of the terrain back, get rid of that grass growing through the rock, and pretty seamlessly it's in there already, nice and easy. Let's move on to the fences. So this is a piece I really like, I've used it quite a lot, the African hut base. Never used it for a hut base, but I've used it for loads of other different things, and I figured it'd make a really nice fence with all the irregular logs on it. I'm using 2 of them to cover up the legs on it because obviously it's supposed to be used horizontally rather than vertically, but this makes a really nice fence once we start copying it around the habitat. And while I finish that off, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has joined the Explorers Club since last week's episode. We've got loads more names on the Explorers Club monolith now. I'll show you that at the end of the episode. So if you've joined, you will see your name in the zoo at the end. We are almost done with the build now. We just need to stop the crocs from being able to climb this part here, and then we can move on to the final stage, which is the vegetation. So block this off with some of these bamboo pieces that we used in the roof, and then we'll start putting some vegetation in. We've got some ferns on the bamboo, which looks really nice, and we're putting some live bamboo in here. What I'm trying to achieve is to get the lush jungle feel of the habitat to extend all the way up to the guest viewing area. We'll drop some leaf litter onto the surface of the water. That looks really interesting. And then there's just one thing I want to make sure of. In the background here, you can see the Bali gates that is the entrance to the island area. I want to make absolutely certain that you can see that when you're stood in this habitat. So we're just going to move some of this bamboo and some of these ferns around so that it can definitely be seen. And that's the habitat done. Let's check it out. Here's the entrance on the Australian side of the habitat, just a load of plants and a modified version of the sign I made for the Outback episode of Planet Wild. And here is the first of our saltwater crocs. We're going to have a male and a female in here. What an impressive beast he is. Here's the viewing. I love how this looks, the way that you can see both the land and the water at the same time, and the guests get such a good view whether they're swimming on top of the water, whether they are up on the land like this, or whether they are underwater like this. It's an amazing view for the guests, and I cannot wait to go here and see it IRL for myself in a couple of weeks' time. Here's an aerial view of the habitat. We've still got some work to do. You can see in the background, you will see the completed Australian area next week in the Australia tour. There's going to be some new stuff in there for you as well. Let's jump into the drone and see where we started today. And this is where we are now. You can't really see anything because of that giant gum tree. So instead, let's cut to the Explorers Club monolith. These are the latest names on the monolith. Thank you so much for joining. If you want to see your name in the zoo, then hit the join button underneath this video or on my channel. Thank you so much for watching as always. I'll see you next week.